Live shooting capabilities in the works. Can you be more specific, Mike? Maybe. There we go. Oh, I guess it's starting in a little less than 40 minutes, but I'll just throw my links up there. Oh yeah, like tethering is an interesting. So I think it's a commonly requested feature. So what happens with feature, actually it's a good segue. So ACDSee is a small to medium-sized company. We don't have a ton of developers. So sometimes there's some things that basically get put on a list of like priority list of sort of features to add to the product. If you really want to see a feature added to the product, what I would suggest is to actually email me. The reason why I say that is because, I mean, lots of times people email the company suggesting things, that sort of thing. You can comment on our YouTube page. We add those to the list. But I really suggest to email me directly, because oftentimes what I end up doing is I first and foremost add that to a list that marketing, which is my department within ACDSee, we promote. So like we come to the developers, and actually I have one later today that I'm going to come up with the developers and suggest some feedback, some suggestions for the product, you know, some features, that sort of thing. The other thing is that I also just send those directly to the developers when we get emails and that sort of thing, with questions or you know, suggestions for the product. So in regards to something like tethering, if that's something you want to see in the product, which I don't know whether or not it's been discussed for the next version of the product, but again, it's so early now because we just released this year's. But if you want to see that, please email me, because like I said, that's how we take those considerations seriously. That's how you get your adjustments in the product. And then Greg said, "But my first ACDSee in early '90s, cool." Oh, right on. Yeah, I mean, I feel like a lot of people have been using it for years, and you strike me as the kind of person that has like been an early adopter of it and has used it since. Lynn, will you be explaining the different versions of ACDSee? I can. That definitely doesn't take very long to explain. So there's 3 versions of ACDSee. So the first version is ACDSee Home. The second version is ACDSee Professional. And the third is ACDSee Ultimate. We're going to be illustrating Ultimate today because it's our sort of like premier product. But the difference between them is very simple. So in essence, ACDSee Home is primarily a digital asset manager, okay? And it has limited editing functions. So what I mean by that is it has an edit suite where you can go in and you can tweak it, you know, exposure and lighting and that sort of thing, and adjust colors, but it's not its primary purpose. ACDSee Professional is that same digital asset manager in all of its functions, but it's much more of an editing tool. And uniquely, it also contains essentially like a raw development suite, which is literally called develop mode in ACDSee. So if you wanted to go through the process of editing your raw files, you could do so within that develop mode. Ultimate is, again, the same digital asset manager. It has the same raw components, but the reason or the way that it is a different product from Professional or Home is that it has essentially a layered editing system, similar to that of Photoshop, if you've used a product like that. If not, it's a layered editor, enables you to make essentially image compositions, because it enables you to pull multiple images into a file and work on it. So those are the differences between the 3. I would say, and the difference also on top of that too is the price, like Ultimate being the most expensive, Pro being the median, and then Home being less costly. Okay, so you said thank you, and is the difference in options to price? Yeah, and obviously a big thing about ACDSee is that we offer what we call a lifetime license key. So a version of the product that doesn't necessarily require a subscription model. We also offer subscriptions, but if you were to go and purchase, like on our website, it's you know, unless you've specified, it's going to be a like a lifetime one-time option. But like I said, we do have subscriptions if that's something that you're interested in as well. So the one that I would say that is most comparable, Hans Peter, is ACDSee Ultimate. And the reason why I say that is because for me, so I'll stress my background. I'm a graphic designer, but I'm also what would be the word for it? I do photographic art. So, and in order to do those things, either graphic design or photographic art, you absolutely critically need a layered editor. And so ACDSee Ultimate offers that layered function. So yeah, that answers your question, hopefully. Okay, so without further ado, I'm gonna throw on some nice music for me to listen to in the background, and we'll get started here today, which I'm excited to. Yeah, so today we're going to be focusing on one image. My email address should be, if you just scroll up, Khalid, it's there, but I'll also pop it in again, along with our YouTube channel. It's aprice@acdsystems.com. So, like I said, what we're going to be talking about today is we're going to be making some adjustments to an image. And the adjustments that we're going to be focusing on are things that help with nature photography. Just some of the critical errors that you might run into while taking nature photography, that sort of thing. So there's a lot involved, and I'm actually really excited because, like I said, I did a bit of research for this one. Okay, so let's open up our image. Let's get actually started now. Let's open up our image here, which is the stream image. And let's have a look at it, and then we'll discuss how we're going to make changes to this image. Get up my notes. Okay. So the image I have for you right now is this image of the stream. And there's a lot of motion in this image, but there's also quite a bit of like mist that occurs in this image. And I find personally that kind of obfuscates, you know, kind of cloud over a bit of detail in this image, and it makes it look a bit, not necessarily flat per se, but it does just overall give it a bit of this overexposed feeling to it. Although this image isn't overexposed, there's a large degree of like white that exists in this bottom portion of this image that we definitely want to work with in order to, you know, better edit and just get way better image quality out of this. So the process that we're going to be going through today is kind of neat because, like I said, I want to make a series of actions that we can record so we can play these on other images. And just to answer another question from earlier, when we go to play those actions on our images, we can go and look at rotating a bunch of images at the same time. So I know that somebody in the comments wanted that. So what we're going to do is we're going to deal with some exposure issues in this image. And our goal overall is to use the histogram to sort of flatten this image out a little bit and give it a greater range of contrast. Then we're going to go through and we'll make some light EQ adjustments. We're going to sharpen this image. And then we're going to go through adjusting chromatic aberration, and we'll talk about what that is if you're unfamiliar. And then finally, when we're done that, I'm going to talk about like ways to make your image pop quite a bit using a bit of blur, and exposure adjustments, as well as we'll do the process of dodging and burning this image so that we can really emphasize the areas of our image that we want to darken and the areas of our image that we want to lighten. So in ACDSee, like I said, I'm just in edit mode. And in order to record a series of adjustments, we need to turn on, we basically need to start recording using the actions section, which is right up here. We'll talk about this more later when we actually go to play this action on another image. But the importance of this is when we turn this recording function on right here using record new action, what we're doing is we're essentially recording all of the changes that we're going to be making to this image. And then when we go through the process of actually saving and stopping that recording and saving that recording, we can use that, that action at any point in the future, which is really useful because we might, in this case, make some nature adjustments to this image that we definitely want to replicate on other images, you know? So what I'm going to do is I'm actually just going to record new action, and it's going to bring up this little recording section here. This first and foremost just indicates to us that we're recording. I don't need to have this panel active per se. You'll notice that in the bottom right-hand corner of our UI, it also indicates to us that we're recording there. So as long as we can see this recording section here, we're good. I don't need to have that display box open in order to go through the process of making adjustments. So right off the bat, I think the first adjustment that I want to make to this image is just a simple curves change. Primarily, we're going to be working with the filter menu. So this filter menu that exists on the left-hand side, these are, in essence, destructive changes versus non-destructive changes. Non-destructive changes are the adjustment layers, that sort of thing, that uses the layer panel. And we're going to be getting to that later when we go through the process of dodging and burning our image. The reason why I'm using these filters is because they're universal, and they have a universal application to our image. And so if we want to essentially use the recording functions right here, this actions panel on other images, we need to make sure that we're not like, drawing on particular little elements in our image, because then that will be applied to the image that we're going to run that action on. In essence, what I mean is you don't want to necessarily be doing brush changes because they might appear on an image that doesn't have the same visual structure. Let's make a curves change, and we can explain a little bit more to do with actions a bit later in this. I'm just going to go down and I'm going to look for tone curves, which is right here, and that'll pop up, and we'll have a look at the histogram. So the histogram didn't pop up naturally, but what you can do is you can just go to the panes panel and bring it up, and it's right there. The purpose of a histogram is literally to give you information about reds, greens, and blues and where they exist in your image. If we're looking at this histogram here, we'll see at the very bottom here, there's a bar that indicates blacks on the very far left, and a bar at the very far right that indicates lights or highlights in this case. And as you can see, there's sort of this like roundness that exists in the center. But it does look like our image contains some heavy blacks, and we're going to do our best to sort of shift these and make this this curve exist mostly in the center and less to the far left that we have here. And we'll explain a little bit more as we go through, but let's try to just adjust these curves. And most of this is just going to be to eye. We're just going to be referencing it using this histogram, which again, you can just bring up from the panes panel. You don't need the histogram per se. Your eye is going to be better than using a tool like this, but I like to just reference it while we're going through because it does provide a bit of help to my own eye. And as you can see, as we adjust our image, you can see that the whole histogram moves. When I pull this curve up, all of our image becomes very washed out. And you'll see that both red, green, and blue values are way further up into the whites section of our image. And as I pull this downwards, you'll see that they're closer to the blacks, shadows, and darks section of our image. What you also may notice is that in the top right-hand corner, we're getting this green approach, that these sort of dots that appear here. The reason why you're seeing that is because we have something called exposure warning turned on. So exposure warning basically indicates the areas of our image that are now fully black. So that's why we get these sort of green dots that are appearing here. We want to avoid this. The reason why is because as elements enter true black, as they have here, they lose contrast because there's essentially no light in that pixel. And the same is true for when parts of our image go red like this too. So when that's the case, we have areas of our image that are blown out and they're too white in this case. And again, no real contrast can be had there because this is now a true white versus the green representation, which is a true black. But what I want to do is I essentially want to darken my image, but just before that hits. You see as I just pull right here on the curve on the left panel here, that it flickers on and off. Well, if I leave it in the gray, if I leave it right here, where I've darkened my image significantly, but I haven't made them full blacks. The benefit of this is that they still lie within a grayer spectrum or like essentially lower saturation. And the benefit of that is that I can, that's still a color that we can maintain the contrast of. My whole goal here was just to darken the whole image just slightly. And we've done that by adjusting this curves by just lowering it slightly. You can see right here, again, we want to avoid that. And we'll just leave it right about here. Visually, this isn't super necessary. I just kind of want to darken it. If we show previous, you can see that before that, there was a lot more sort of like white elements, especially in and among the trees here. We're trying to avoid that. So I can hit done on this, and it's going to apply that change when we hit done. Now, that is recorded. So that first filter that we've applied, that is something that's been recorded, and it is going to be added when we go to play this on a future image. Before we move on to sharpening our image and adjusting chromatic aberration and that sort of thing, let's look at the light EQ. Because there's still parts of this image that I would much rather emphasize. So we'll talk about that. So light EQ is again a part of this exposure and lighting section here. And I'm going to show some cool things about light EQ here. So light EQ has a variety of different functions. They're listed up the top here. Light EQ is a bit more of a it's a bit more complicated version to deal with exposure and contrast, essentially. It's sort of like ACDSee's custom method of dealing with lighting in an image. There's a variety of different methods. You can just do a singular like increase method, which is called one step here, which we won't be using, but it's worth noting that you can just add light or decrease light using this one step method. Alternatively, we have the basic approach, which in essence takes that one bar and splits it into 3 bars. And the way it splits it up is it designates 1 bar as shadows, 1 bar as midtones, and 1 bar as highlights. And in essence, it allows you to just adjust one of those sections. Or rather, you can increase the 3 of these bars, but it allows you to increase the light of the brightness rather of your highlights, or decrease the brightness of your highlights. Alternatively, you can increase the brightness of your midtones, decrease the brightness of your midtones, that sort of thing. And as you can see, as I do that, once again, we're getting an indication from the exposure warning showing us that our image has lost a ton of contrast. Standard takes those 3 bars and splits it to, how many do we got rocking here? 9 bars per value. So it basically gives you even more range of control. At the very like far left here, we have like just the shadows, for example. And as you can see, the only area of our image that is like close to shadows was that one area that we pulled out of we pulled down when we were using the curves tool. So if we were to just increase or rather brighten our shadows, you'll notice that the only area of our image that is adjusted is that one corner here where it's darkest. Whenever you have these like sliders up here, what you can do is, if you don't like the settings involved, you can just like right click to set them back to their default values. Yeah, the one that we're going to be using though is my favorite mode, and that's advanced. And the difference between advanced and standard is standard has these 9 bars, okay? Advanced actually has 100 bars, and then rather than showing you those bars, they're just indicated using this sort of flush diagram of our image, which makes more sense when we start pulling these values upwards. So in this top section, this bar that's located at the top here, and then there's this line down the center, and then there's a bar that's located at the bottom. This section represents our highlights. And as you can see, I can raise parts of my image, like here, that is sort of along the midtones, and it'll add more light to that section. But if I take further on the right here on my image, and I raise up here, you'll notice that I'm now adding, again, I'm adding brightness to areas of my image that are either my highlights or whites. And so what happens here is, again, really I want to avoid having that red appear or the green appear in this area. What I want to do is I kind of want to just pull a little bit of light into the section of my image that's the midtones, this area right here. And I want to actually do the same on the right-hand side with the shadows, okay? So let me indicate, or rather explain how this bar works. So here, to pull these values up, I'm going to right-click. So in essence, to add light, to add brightness to my my midtones or my highlights, all I'm doing is I'm right-clicking and dragging that upwards. That's also actually doable right from the image itself. You can notice if I hover over the image, I have control of those same values. Now, on the bottom portion that represents our shadows and again, our midtones to our shadows rather, what we want to do is we want to right click with our mouse and pull downwards in those areas. And as you can see, I can really dramatically make our image quite darker, but as soon as that white sort of indicator on our UI starts to enter our shadows and our blacks, we're going to get that same indicator, this case, the exposure warning, showing us that our image is now losing contrast. So ultimately what I want to do with this bar, I'm just going to reset the values using the little reset button up at the top here. All I want to do is just pull a little bit of light into the midtones and make it a bit, add some shadows to the midtone section as well. And what we're doing is we're trying to get the most contrast out of our image. Right now, it's going to appear a little flat, but we're going to get to that as we go through this process. Right now, we're just trying to get the most detail on our image as possible, okay? So I'm going to tweak the amplitude on these just slightly, because I don't think it needs to be that great. But I think we want to be in around that area here. And we can just show previous and adjust the contrast as we see fit in this section. Maybe I'll add it. Ooh, we're losing a bit of value up at the top there. So I think I'm comfortable here. I'm going to hit done. And then what we're going to do is we're going to have a look at some sharpening functions within this image. I just want to have a quick look at some of the questions here. Ted asks, I work with old black and white and many are a bit out of focus and faded. What tools do you recommend to help refocus? There is no focus tool that I can see. Yeah, the problem with focus issues is that's really comes in at the camera level and less in a post-processing. There are certain things you can do though. Like for example, if you had a subject that's like eyes, you wanted to increase like the sharpness of, that would sort of really allow those eyes to pop and appear in focus while not overly affecting the rest of the image. Again, we're gonna have some look at some sharpness for our nature photography here. But when it comes to old black and white images, we can talk a little bit about adding sharpness to an image, which doesn't accommodate for an out of focus image, but it can really greatly improve what you see. Okay. Stephen asks, what would be auto on the light EQ look like? Does it clip or stay within the bounds? I would definitely recommend not using auto. I mean, auto light EQ is fine. Like it's going to be, it's going to basically generate the values that best fit within that histogram that we looked at earlier. But just adjust it yourself. Try to get into the habit of manually adjusting those things. Or alternatively, you can work with those auto adjustments and then dial back from there. But I find that what Antoine said afterwards is the light EQ does, or the auto light EQ does have a tendency to overexpose. Again, I wouldn't rely on auto functions too much. I would rely on more sort of manual adjustments. Light EQ is a like very, very versatile tool, and to just use the like simple auto double click on an image where you're in light EQ can work, but I would sort of tweak those values yourself. So let's go to the next portion of this, which is sharpness. Sharpness is very interesting and something that I don't think many people use it often. I want to illustrate. So yeah, let's go into the sharpness tool. So again, we're going to use the filter panel, and we're just going to go into detail here and sharpen. Okay. So here's our image. The problem with sharpness is if we just dramatically increase the sharpness on our file. So if I increase the amount, the radius, it looks horrible. It's like very articulate and just grainy. We are getting like quite a bit of detail out of our image, but we're also losing a lot of values because a good portion of our image was intended to be like really smooth, especially in where around the water is, and we want to maintain those values. So I'm going to teach you a little trick. To start out with, what I want to do is, I think what we're going to do is we're going to crank the amount. We're going to leave it on 100, okay? But I want to reduce the radius. I want to have essentially the radius set to 1. We're going to increase the detail slider as well. Again, we want to see what we're doing. We just want to have some control over what we're seeing. Now, mask is kind of hard to see in this mode. There's no real way for us to indicate like what the mask looks like over top of this image. But if I hit the Alt key while I have mask highlighted, or when I'm increasing the slider, you're going to see that this white indicator pops up, okay? And this is really useful. So again, what I'm doing is I'm just adjusting the mask slider itself, and I'm holding Alt. At the far left, the whole image is represented by white, okay? And what that means is the application of the amount, the radius, and the detail is being applied to the entire image. I don't want that because, again, what I really want to negate or not have any detail appear in at all is the area of our image where the water lies, okay? So what I want to do is I want to hold this mask, and I'm going to draw this to the right. And as you can see, as I draw this to the right, what's occurring is I'm starting to be very selective, okay, where white represents the area that will see adjustments to the image, and then black is represented by we're not going to see any adjustments in those areas. So in essence, when I pull this mask further to the right, white means that those adjustments, radius, amount, and detail are turned on, and black represents the area where those adjustments are turned off. Martin, to answer your question about radius, is okay. So when this application is when we're increasing the amount and the detail, the radius is going to increase the range of where that the range of the pixel. So when it's lower, it's much finer, and when we have the radius like dramatically increased, you're going to see that there's more of an expression of amount and detail applied nearby that same pixel. So in essence, increases the area of which that effect occurs. Rick asked, because we were working with destructive edits in the left panel, how do we create a copy of the photo to practice edits on? That's a great question. And actually, we're going to talk about this immediately after we're finished the sharpening adjustment. So we'll talk about that momentarily. And Anton, can you please explain once again later the top and bottom parts of the advantage? Yes, I will go into that once more as well, because it is a bit more complicated. So we'll touch base with that in a second too. But getting back to what we're doing with the mask section again here, right? I'm adjusting this mask portion, and I'm holding down Alt. And what I want to see is, in this case, I'm looking for areas of my image like these rocks and this beautiful foliage above our scene to have this application occur. I want to see white in those areas. What I don't want is to see white where the riverbed is here. And the reason why is because there shouldn't be any granular detail in an area that's like very fast moving water, and we had a little bit of a shutter speed so that we could capture a bit of movement in that area. So I think where we want our mask to be is around 85. I'm liking that. If we switch out and we show previous, we can see the gravity to which that effect occurs. Let's go into the foliage. I think this is best represented right here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to hit show previous, and you can see that there's a slight contrast improvement in the highlights right along here. That's getting a little bit more, a lot of these little tree branches, they're a bit more refined and they now have much higher contrast due to the sharpening function. Okay, so I'm happy with this. Again, but because we use this mask function, all of this area is sort of remains untouched, which is good. So I'm just gonna hit done, okay? And then so because we're using these filter menu adjustments, we are sort of working destructively with our image. But just as a note, everything that we do, okay, every filter that we use, we can go in and we can make a duplication, okay, using the layer panel of our image so that the first layer remains basically non-destructive. It's only the second layer, the copied layer, that is actually seeing those effects. So as we go through, and if you want to say like, oh, I screwed up on the sharpening, even though I clicked done or something like that on that filter, all I could do is I could simply then either delete or hide this layer and make a new duplicate from my base layer, which is the sort of unchanged layer in this case. So again, how to do that is you just click on whatever layer you've made adjustments to or want to make adjustments to, and you just go to the duplicate layer. The only thing to note is if I now want to make a change to this image, like the next thing we're going to be talking about is chromatic aberration. If I want to make a change, it has to be now to this topmost layer. I mean, it can be to layer 1, but you're not going to see it because you've got a layer over top of it. We'll talk a little bit more about layer order. I've talked about layer order in depth in other workshops, but I want to talk about it a little bit in here too. But point is that layer order matters, and the top layer is what you're seeing. So I would go through the process of making duplicates as you go through, because that basically makes it so that you can always revert back to the previous change. You can also use like your undo values and stuff like that while you're working through, but it might be a little bit more cumbersome than just using the duplicate tool. Okay. And then the other thing to note is as we're working with these filters, you say, oh, okay, what if I want to, have a non-destructive version of my file? Well, you could have a bunch of these different layers. You could have a couple different duplicates with, different filters applied to it. And all you need to do is save your file, save as an ACDSee file format, and that will enable you to have essentially a non-destructive file that you can edit in the future versus flattening your file. So I would always save as, so you always have your original in this case, but then also save it as an ACDSee file format so you can go in and you can tweak values. So we'll do that. I'm gonna, oh, I didn't mean to stop recording. Oh well. Sure, I'll record up to that point, that's fine. We'll put it into uncategorized and we'll name it action 1. So because I saved as an ACDSee file there, it's essentially stopping my action, which is okay because we were just about to stop the action anyway. But I'm going to, and it prompts me to then place it into a category, which is what's happening right here. And let me think about that actually. I guess we're just we're mostly trying to add detail to our image. So add it to detail and we'll name the action. I guess we'll name it nature detail. And we'll put it into that folder. But what you'd want to do is you'd want to hold on to these adjustments as you're going through. Let's see if I can go back to our original image. That's fine. Okay, So the next thing we want to do is we want to go through and we want to use chromatic aberration in our image, and I'm going to show you why. Antoine asked, why not use an individual layer for each of the destructive filters, thus making them all individually non-destructive? That is exactly what I just said. You just duplicate each layer, and then you can add in a filter application to like the previous layer. Yeah, there's lots of different ways to work with layers in this case, varying levels of opacity to get the same thing. But like I said, I would start by duplicating your base image unchanged and work from there. So we've gone through, and what have we done? We've made some exposure adjustments using the curve tool. We've adjusted the light EQ on our image. We've sharpened this image now, but you're going to notice that there's an issue with our image, and there's some chromatic aberrations happening, specifically right here. So what chromatic aberration is, okay, it's a camera fault. So when I took this image, the camera did a very poor job of combining RGB values. So what we're seeing right here is much more green values than a mixed values per se. So we're getting this sort of like optical illusion that occurs here, where we're getting this hard green light that extends at the edge of our image. And this is very fixable. We can use the chromatic aberration tool to remove this sort of effect that occurs here. There might be some more chromatic aberration elsewhere in this image. It's probably a little bit around the edge of this rock as well, but the area of the image that's most notable to me is this area right here. Just one moment, I'm gonna plug in my headset so I don't lose. There we go. So what I want to do is I'm just going to click my topmost layer. So this is the layer that I was making adjustments to. Again, I could make a duplicate right now if I wanted to, but I'm just going to click chromatic aberration. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to draw this inwards. I'm going to try to get rid of this green line. So let's zoom in a bit more. And to do that, we're going to essentially we're going to add color. We're going to additively correct this by introducing more values. So if I tweak these values, so it says fix red and cyan. Well, my issue here is, I guess my issue is yellow and cyan. So if I just pull this slightly forward, I should be able to address these lines, this chromatic aberration that occurs. If I was to just push these further, I think I'm going to make this issue more grievous. So I think I want to draw them in the opposite direction. And I think right about there, it looks like our issue was more yellow than it was cyan. But I think right there, we've essentially got rid of it. As you can see, as I pan through, it'll show the original. Let's see if I can illustrate once more. So we'll show previous, hide, and we might want, I'm just going to play around with this until I like it the best. Yeah, and I want to maybe increase, different strength. That case isn't doing anything. But I think based on the previous green line, I think that looks pretty good. Again, I might want to pull cyan back slightly, actually. And I think right there, we get a lot of that contrast back. And I'll just show previous again to show how egregious that line was. I hope you guys all can see that because it's pretty severe. I'm just going to zoom in one more time to show. But we've used chromatic aberration to essentially get rid of those fraying areas part of our image. I'll hit done when I'm complete with this, which is fine. And then the next portion, we're going to add a little bit of a vignette, which was going to address some of the issues on this image as well, because right now we lack central focus. There's a lot of detail, even upwards into the corners of our image, and so we want to draw our audience's eyes inwards to right here, which is sort of where the action is happening in this image here. So we'll use vignette or vignetting to sort of correct that. I'll do that right now. Let's go to the Vignette tool up in the Add section here. And that's pretty a cool way to, or rather a good way to work with vignetting is to have your opacity fully cranked up, so 100, and to have a normal blend mode to start. And then what we want to do is we essentially want the most egregious version of what we the vignette that we want. So we want it to be like the darkest. We want it to be to really pop in our image. So we'll work with that, and then once we have it sort of set and in place and in the proper portion of our image, we can reduce opacity and reduce sort of some of these values to drop outwards. I just like to prefer to work with the most intense versions of the. So we'll play around with the horizontal to center that, vertical, center that, clear zone. I think I want to further outwards about there. And the transition will be very subtle around there. And I think I want to stretch it outwards slightly. And then once we have that set, I'm going to take a blend mode. So I like those values. I like the approach on the corners here. That looks good to my eye. So what I'll do is I'll take the blend mode and I'm going to set it to soft light, which is really dramatic. And I'm just going to reduce the opacity until I find a middle ground that I like. I'll have a look at the before and after. I think that's it right there. So the next thing we're going to do is we're actually going to go through and we're going to make some adjustment layer changes to this image. So far, all of the changes we've made, with the exception of duplicating our image, have been using the filter panel. Unfortunately, I had to stop recording there because I accidentally saved my image midway through, but we can still use that same action to illustrate if we had continued on. When you're done, so say in this case you're recording and you finished with your sharpness and with your chromatic aberration and you're cropping with your your vignetting, you would simply just click the stop recording button right here, and then you would name your action, similar to what I did after I hit save as. Again, it'll prompt you to pick a category to place it into, and you can make your own category if you'd like, and then it'll just prompt you to name it. Alternatively, obviously, as we learned, we can just go to save your file, and it's also going to prompt you to stop your recording so that you can utilize that recording in the future. Okay, we're going to do a couple things. So what have we done so far? So we've addressed the curves of our image. We've slightly darkened the overall values of our image, and then we've used Light EQ, which I guess I'll open again to explain to Antoine here. We've used Light EQ to address some midtone issues. So we wanted to get the most contrast to our whole image. And again, what I'm doing using Light EQ is I have the areas of our image on the top. We have essentially two bars within the advanced mode. One represents midtones all the way to whites, okay, which is this top bar right here. And then the bottom bar right here represents blacks and shadows all the way to midtones. And so when I said earlier that I wanted to adjust those midtones, I wanted to either add more light to them or darken them respectively. You can see that there's this dark gray band that exists in the center of our image here, this space right here. That represents, again, those midtones that sort of slowly stressed all the way to sort of as we start getting into the highlights and whites. And then the same goes for the bottom bar here. So this is the spectrum that we actually want to adjust because this is the area where we're going to additively get contrast out of our image. So again, I can increase the values by right-clicking within the top portion that represents midtones to lights. And then alternatively, I can also use the right-click button to add darkness in parts of our image with the midtones. So that's what we're doing within the Light EQ panel. And there's many ways to do it. This is the most complicated way, but we can also do the same thing with our standard adjustment or basic. Okay, Ted asked, How do you re-anchor panels? You can re-anchor panels by taking the actual thing itself, the panel, and you'll notice that whenever I move the panel, there's this little indicator that pops up in the center of the screen. And actually, there's a couple different indicators. If I pull the panel towards one of those indicators, you can place it, then it sits within that location that you designate. So again, you can just take any existing undocked panel and dock it that way. I'll just dock it on the left to give you an example. I think they, as with the release of 2021, they made all these panels by default undocked, but you can redock them very quickly. Yeah, so that's Light EQ, and that's a little bit about the docking of panels there. Okay, so next part is actually the fun part. So we got the hard part done. We got the part that we're going to be playing on our subsequent images, right? We got the part that we're going to take that and we're going to run that action on other images. So let's do that. I'm just going to save this ACDSee file. So I'll do that right now because we did make a vignette correction in there. And let's talk about what we're going to do next, which is we're going to make a little additive effect using blur and exposure, which is going to give the appearance, we're going to make this image have this sort of dreamy appearance to it. And then we're going to go through and we're going to use dodging and burning to further enhance our image. And that's really where we're going to give this image a lot of a spatial context, and where we're going to gain a lot of like visual cue out of our image. But if we wanted to run that same action like we just talked about, I'm just going to go back to manage mode, and let's just navigate to a different folder. For example, I'll navigate to say, let's go to our landscape folder here, which was somewhere around here. Yeah, let's just go into photos one here. Oh no, I had a really nice photo that I wanted to replace to. Why can I not see landscapes? Oh my God, I'm blind. Okay, there we go. Okay, I was just I'm just navigating to any old folder, right? I have a bunch of different stock photos in here, so we'll use this one. But the way that I could go, I could say like select a variety of images. Like say I wanted to select 3, 4, 5, 10 different images, a whole bunch of images. I could select these ones, for example. And what I could do is, if you remember earlier, we recorded that action and we named it nature detail. Well, I can go to this actions panel from manage mode, okay? And I can actually run this change from the actions panel. So let's just click this image on its own, for example. I'll go to this one, and I remember saving that under detail. So I'll go to nature detail, and then I could play that change on this image. And so this action will run, and then it will save a new version of my file with those adjustments that we made, those filters we made to the image. Actually, what I can do is I'll take these two images, these selected, and we'll compare them in a second here. But just to reiterate that, we can run any action that we've created in edit mode, okay, on any number of images. You can just apply and run those actions on as many as you'd like. But again, all I did is I clicked on my image here, I went up to actions, and then I found the location where I saved my action, and then I ran it. Alternatively, I can go to the options function, and I can do a couple different things. In this case, I renamed my modified image and I placed it in the same folder, but I can also completely overwrite my original file. Or alternatively, when I go to make an adjustment, or rather play an action on an image, I can also place it into a new folder entirely. It also gives me the ability to actually save it in a different file format while I'm making it. So if I wanted to, I can actually save it as a TIFF file, or I could save it as an ACDSee file if I wanted to. There's a variety of different file formats that we can save that when we go to rename our modified image. So this gives you basically some criteria and some options to when you run that specific action that you've created. Let's just compare and contrast these two images. I'm just going to click on my two images, right click and go compare. And let's see how different they look. So the second one is the one that had the detail adjustments as well as the curves adjustment, which, as you can see, I think definitely does affect this top right-hand corner, and I definitely see a significant adjustment to the detail, especially in the mid-center here, where we get a lot of that moss detail. So that application is running a variety of adjustments on our image, as you can see here. Unfortunately, I turned it off before I made that vignette correction because I think that would be the most significant. But you definitely can see that the adjustments were applied to this right-hand image here. We'll get out of here and we'll continue on our journey editing that image. The reason why I chose to show you that now is because the adjustments that we made with those filters were universal. So they were being applied to our whole image. The changes that we're going to make now are going to be using the dodge and burn tool, and they're going to be in specific parts of our image. We don't want to run an action with adjustments to specific parts of our image, and the reason why is because then the new image that might structurally or geometrically be a little bit different from that, it's going to gain those same qualities. So there might be some like weird burn marks and stuff like that in parts of our image where it shouldn't exist. So we just want to be mindful of that, and that's the reason why we stopped recording our actions before we're going through the process of dodging and burning our image. So I'm going to take my layer 1 copy one here, and the first thing we're going to do before we dodge and burn our image is actually make a little bit of a subtle effect that I find is very useful for really giving this image a lot of character. So I'm going to, once again, I'm going to actually duplicate that top image here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually apply a exposure adjustment. So I'm going to click on the exposure adjustment layer. It's going to bring up this panel right here, as you can see. And I'm also going to make a blur adjustment on our image, as you can see right here. Let's reduce the blur. We don't want it to be that excessive. So I think I'm going to go a blur of about 25. And I'll show you what it looks like without the blur. So you can see it's especially in the area where the tree is here with all this like nice light that we got out of that that sharpening. You can start to see parts of that really sort of blend through, and we get a lot of value out of that blur change. So we want that, but we're going to lower the opacity. So when we lower the opacity, all we're doing is we're reducing the overall effect of that one adjustment layer. You'll notice when I click on my exposure, the opacity goes up to 100 because each of these adjustment layers has their own settings. The other thing I want to do is I want to do something called clipping, okay? Clipping is when we take this blur adjustment, okay, and we apply it to the first image layer that exists beneath it. So this blur, okay, is only affecting layer 1 copy 2, which we're going to we'll rename this and we'll call it our glow layer, for example. So blur is now only being applied to this glow layer. And exposure is actually being applied to everything that exists beneath it, but we also want to clip our exposure to the glow layer. So now consider these 3 layers, these 2 adjustment layers and this base layer, consider them like a part of a group per se, because they're these adjustment layers are the ones that are treating this glow layer. So our exposure and our contrast we're also going to increase. And this looks a bit juvenile right now, which is fair. But what we're going to do is we're going to take this glow layer and we're actually going to lower the opacity of it as well. We don't want this to be that extreme. So I'm going to lower the opacity. I think we're going to set it to, let's say, 50. And we're also going to take the blend mode of our glow layer. Okay, so this layer right here, and we're going to click soft light. So it's going to blend these adjustments, these exposure and blur adjustments, to the layers that exist beneath it. We'll call layer 1 copy 1. We'll rename that and we'll call it our base layer. And let's take our layer 1 and we'll just, I don't know, call it a safety layer, because it's only there that if we ever make a bad change, we can work off of it. But our glow layer is now blended with our base layer. And our glow layer contains those blur and exposure adjustments. And again, I'm just going to play around with this until I like the overall effects. And we can have a look at our saved to sort of see what we like. I might increase the blur slightly and play around with the opacity a bit more. And I think we're right there is where we want. So the next thing we're going to do, now that we've sort of finished the blurring and exposure adjustments here, we're going to actually make those final dodge and burn adjustments. And those adjustments we're going to be making to our base layer. Because our glow layer isn't fully transparent. So if we were to, say, hide our base layer and our safety layer, you can see that these 3 layers represent what we see right now. And you can see that they're not fully opaque. They are slightly transparent. So when applied to something like the base layer, you're getting that effect. Let's take a look at this base layer. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to, I'm just seeing a couple of you are noting that there's some lag. I'm sorry about the lag. I don't think there's anything I can do right now. Some people seem to not be having that lag as well. So it might be. Yeah, some people are fine, others are not okay. Let me say this, for those of you that are experiencing lag, we do re-upload these to our YouTube page. It might be an internet connection experience for some of you, in which case note that this will be placed onto our YouTube page and you'll be able to see it in the future, especially if you're having some like critical lag. But just because some people are having issues and others are not having issues, I don't think it's on my end, unfortunately. But like I said, this will be uploaded to our YouTube page so that you can watch it without lag. With that said, I'm going to continue on because I don't want to take too much time away from that. Sorry, though, I wish I could help more. So I want to make those dodge and burn adjustments, and I want to make it to this base layer because, like we said, those adjustments that exist on the glow layer are really just a slightly transparent. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this base layer and we're going to make a light EQ change, okay? So I'm going to go over to light EQ and I'm going to add it here. And you can see that our image is like dramatically increased in brightness. So we don't want that. We only want to be very selective about where our dodge and burn exists. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this light EQ adjustment. You can see it here. And I'm going to turn off this mask. So I'm going to right click this mask and I'm going to set it as black, okay? And what that does is when we're working with masks, I mentioned this earlier, white means on and black means off. Well, when we're working with masks, we can choose which areas we want to have on with something called the brush tool. And we'll illustrate this shortly. It's quite helpful in this case. So this layer, I'm going to copy, okay? So I'm going to right click and I'm going to duplicate this light EQ layer. And we're going to name these. The top one here, I'm going to turn it into a burn layer. So I'll call that burn, and I'm going to take the layer directly beneath it. I'm going to rename it, and I'm going to call this dodge. Now, on their own, when we go to paint white on here, nothing really happens. So what we want to do is we want to actually take these layers and we want to change their blend mode. So right here, I'm clicking on burn. I'm going to navigate all the way up to blend mode, and I'm actually going to select burn. So that burn layer now has the blending of burn, and I'm going to take this dodge layer and I'm going to make this the same. I'm going to make it a dodge layer. And you may say, hey, Adam, why don't you just use the dodge and burn tool that's right in the filter panel? You can do that. You absolutely can do that. But I want to make these changes non-destructively. I want to make them so I can edit their location and placement in the future. And so that's the reason why I'm using the Light EQ panel in coordination with the proper corresponding dodge and burn tools. So let's burn first. Let's make parts of our image darker, and then we'll raise other parts of our image using the dodge function. So I'm going to click on this burn layer. I'm going to make sure that I'm clicked on the actual mask itself, okay? And I'm going to navigate all the way over to the right left-hand corner here, and I'm going to make sure that my brush tool is selected and that the foreground color is white. Again, that foreground color being white matters because I'm going to be brushing the effect on, okay? Where the mask is currently set to black, meaning that the mask is currently set off. So let's start burning our image. I might leave my opacity quite low while we're darkening our image. So we'll probably leave the opacity around 20, and we're just gonna darken parts of our image. We're just gonna go through and we'll darken the parts that we feel like it sort of suits it. I'm liking it in along these rock areas here. And you can see as I draw it on, my mask is representing, there's a little bit of gray area, there's little white parts that are popping up. And that's the part of our image that are getting affected by this, this burn layer. And again, I'm just gonna go through and I'm gonna find the parts of my images that, of the image that I feel like fits with these adjustments. And if you can see right now, if I unhide I hide this layer, you can see the parts what I've gone and I've selectively added a bit of darkness. I burned them. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to dramatically increase the feathering and slightly nib, and I'm just going to burn this portion here because this strikes me as too white. And it's taking a lot of my visual eye away from the center of my image. And as you can see, as I burn this portion of my image, I'm actually gaining contrast. If I zoom in, you can see that, especially in and around here, I get some leaves popping up that weren't visible previously because of the issue of them being they were essentially too moderate in saturation. And as I sort of burn those areas, I'm starting to gain a lot of a contrast back out of my image. I'm happy with that. That looks good for me for burning. Let's go through the process of actually dodging this image now, and we'll brighten parts of our image. Well, I can tell you right now, the single biggest issue with brightness in our image is this top right-hand corner where we can't see the contrast of this tree. So I'm definitely going to be dodging this part of our image. And once again, we'll use a lower opacity and our nib width is probably fine. So I'm just going to start burning that area and you'll start to see the texture of those tree branches come back. Here's before, here's after. Totally non-destructive. So now we've got a bit more out of those trees. I'm going to decrease my nib width and feathering. The most important area of our image is this area right here. This is the center focus of our image. So I really want to draw attention to this. And I want to give this the impression of being almost lighter in color or having more whites in it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just brighten this area itself to give it this effect of almost looking like there's some steam coming off of it. I might even just right a bit where there's a lot of water movement, I might also dodge it slightly. And so zooming out, you can see that there's this beautiful, like a little bit more center focus because of the dodge tool. I can now see that this area is a bit brighter and now captures more of my interest. I might also tweak slightly, lowering my feathering. I might tweak some of these rocks slightly right here. Just a slight adjustment. And so we'll turn off the dodge, and you can see that that really dramatically increases, or rather centers in the focus of the visual area of our image. So that's where I would save this image. I'm comfortable with these adjustments. Maybe I'd make a couple cropping decisions or something like that along the line. But overall, this is like some really handy nature photography adjusting tips that I would recommend, especially in conjunction with using the Actions browser to sort of make a lot of this easy for yourself by batching, or rather playing these actions, pardon me, on your other images. So just to reiterate, what did we do in this workshop? Well, we made some filters in conjunction with Actions. We changed curves, so that was a big one. We went in and we adjusted light EQ using the advanced function, although you could easily go in and use standard or basic for some of these components. The next thing is we went to the sharpen function, and we sharpened in conjunction with the mask itself. We used the mask to reference, oops, I'm on a adjustment layer right now, that's why it's adjusting just that. But if I had selected a base layer and gone into sharpen, that should adjust the issue. So I used the mask in conjunction with the Alt key to hone in on the parts of my image that I wanted to adjust the sharpness of. I then went in and I made a vignette with my image using the vignette filter. And when I was happy with those components, I ended my recording. So I went up to the recording of the action function, and that's where I saved my action so that I could play it on the rest of my images. And then what I did is I made this sort of unusual layer. I kind of made this glow layer, which is mostly a visual effect I was looking for to give my image a little bit more of a dreamy quality. And the way that I was able to do that was simply by taking a base layer, duplicating that base layer, and then adding a couple of like lowered opacity adjustments to one layer that itself had a blend mode that was adjusted. So lowering your opacity, adjusting the soft light, and then having a couple layers, one of which was a blur layer with a lowered opacity. And then lastly, all I did was I added 2 light EQ layers. I right-clicked those layers to make them black, and then I set the layer to either dodge or burn, and dodge or burned my image respectively. So those are sort of tips that I would use. I would replicate and use over and over and over again in reference with a set of images, all of which were sort of nature photography oriented images. I'm going to discard this and we'll talk. So earlier, somebody had mentioned, hey Adam, how do I go about, so maybe I have a couple images before I go through the process of making one of these actions. I want to go in and I want to rotate a bunch of images. Well, I can take these images, and I believe, well, the right off the bat, you could just go to the batch function and you could rotate them using this tool, the batch rotate tool. So if I wanted to select all these images and rotate them 90 degrees or 180 degrees, I could do so. But I think also you can do that within the geometry tab within Actions as well. So if I wanted to flip these horizontally or rotate them left or right, I can also rotate the batch functions within Actions. Much like other digital editing softwares and much like other photo editing softwares, there's 100 different ways to get the same effect in ACDSee. And in terms of batching, you can batch with a variety of different effects within Actions, and you can also batch with a variety of different effects using the actual batch tool itself. I won't go into specifically batch developments, but I have in other videos, we've covered these extensively, and I will do more workshops in the future about them. But it's a powerful tool to make like batch raw developments, which uh, comes to the question that Ted asked, was this a raw photo we were working on? No, it was a JPEG. So edit mode will take any image format that you have, whether if it be TIFF or whether it be like a PNG or a raw file. And what it's going to do is it's going to take that file and it's going to convert it into a JPEG. Actually, it might be a TIFF. Actually, it might convert it into a TIFF. And then you're editing that TIFF file. And when you go to save your file, it's going to be saved as a file separate from your raw file. In all editors, this isn't just the case for ACDSee, but for every single editor you've ever edited an image in, a photograph in, you can't save. You cannot save like editing adjustments directly to a raw file. So raw files are proprietary to a camera, meaning camera has a variety of different sort of patented settings that when you go to take a raw image, something like ACDSee can't code directly to that raw file because that's like sort of patented information. So what we can do and what all editors do when dealing with raw files is they either convert them to a different file type, okay, which is what happens in edit mode, or with something like develop mode in ACDSee, when you're developing an image in develop mode, what happens is something called a sidecar file is created so that whenever you go to edit that raw file, what ACDSee does is it has a look to what's in that sidecar file. And what that sidecar file says, it could be a variety of different settings and adjustments, and like maybe you have plus 50 exposure, and maybe you have a vibrancy of hue change, and it checks for all of those things. And then when you're editing that raw file, it's displaying those sidecar adjustments to you. It's never interacting with the original raw file. It's just opening the file and then playing the sidecar adjustments on it. So development and edit work quite differently when it comes to raw files specifically. So to answer your question, short, no, we were working on a JPEG, but long answer was what I just explained. John asked, I have other editing SW that creates its own proprietary. Yes, once the file is opened. That SWI does not create sidecar files. What software editor are you using? Also, sidecar files are quite common, but they're not necessarily always the solution that the developers have for those things. But I guarantee you 100% that there's no way you're interacting with the raw file itself. You're doing something else. There's some other form of process that the developers of your software, like Affinity or something like that, are using. Yeah. Can you use develop for JPEG? Yes, you absolutely can. So JPEGs are different from raw files. JPEGs are not read-only files. There are files that you can write to. So when you develop a JPEG, instead of having to create a sidecar file, ACDSee can actually write all that information directly to the JPEG. So when you develop a JPEG in develop mode, okay, you're saving that information to the writable JPEG. And when you're developing a raw file in develop mode, you're creating that sidecar file that contains those edits. So they function slightly differently, but the end product to you, the user, is going to be super similar. Develop mode is entirely non-destructive no matter what the file type is. Develop mode is it's called parametrically non-destructive. Yes, yeah, John, totally, cool. Raw file and is auto imported to Infinity. Yeah, so there's a conversion process that occurs there, John. Yeah. Tom asked, after you clip adjustment layers to a base layer, is there a way to collapse and expand the result group of layers to simplify organizing workspace? Yeah, you can merge. Okay, so we'll go back into that file. This is destructive. So a tool that I'm really fighting for in ACDSee is something called a folder structure. We don't have one yet, But shorthand, there is a way to do what you're describing. So here's that same edited file that we did. What you can do is you can take these blur layers, these exposure layers, and you can do something called merge down. So if you were very happy, okay, with this layer one copy one that had these exposure and blur changes, what you could do is you could essentially write this exposure with the according opacity by merging it down to the layer beneath it. And that does the same thing. It's not creating like a folder structure that contains those things, but it is functionally doing exactly that, which is merging the things together. The only problem being is that is destructive, as you can see, because the editing functions of those layers has now been merged into one. So what I would suggest is if you want to merge down, just make sure you have your settings tickety-boo. Ted asked, if I convert a raw file, which image format retains more or most of the raw data? I think a TIFF does, and I think that's part of the reason why edit mode converts it to a TIFF, because TIFFs are like very high image quality, but still considered to be ultimately a lossy file. I don't quote me on this, but I'm fairly certain that's the case. It's one of the highest quality lossy files. So if there is a conversion process in place, I believe that would be would make sense to convert to a TIFF because you retain the most visual data. Khalid, thank you. So nice to have you. I'm glad it was helpful. Please, yeah, feel free to send me an email. I'll link that once more to everybody. And then, like I said, this will be uploaded to our YouTube channel within the next couple days so that you can review it, especially for those of you that are having lag issues, again, to which I apologize. I wish there was more I could do. So my apologies. Ed asked, before you finish, can you switch to manage and show us the original? Yeah, absolutely. Okay, oops, yeah, we don't need that, so let's save those, discard. So that one I think was the original process, yes. So compare images. So on the left, we have our finalized image, and on the right, we have our original image. Yeah, kind of night and day, you know? But yeah, that's the comparison. James asked, how would you use the noise function? Okay, so the purpose of adding or removing noise, thank you, Marcia, glad of it, is, so noise is for adding or removing a granular detail that's distracting. So I can illustrate that to you. Let's go to stream and let's, we can slightly increase the sharpness of this image. So maybe I can give you a better example. Radius, maybe not radius, I'll just increase the detail. You can compare a bunch of images, Ted. I think you can, I don't know how many you can compare. Let me finish this explanation of the noise function, then I'll show you. So, okay, so I got an image that's quite granular. You're starting to see that granularity really affect the top portion here. If I go to noise reduction, which I believe is just it's in develop mode and it's just here in detail. What you could do is you can play around with the luminance and the strength to sort of remove granular detail from your image. So you're starting to see a lot of that be smudged together, and essentially the pixels, instead of having those pixels have individual pixel information, say, this pixel is this color. It's essentially modifying it so that a lot of the pixels nearby that are, say, like within 10 brightness values or hue values of the pixel, they're sort of homogenized. So you get this effect where it homogenizes a bunch of these pixels, and that looks like perceptibly smooths the image quite a bit. So if we zoom out it'll give you an idea of how different that looks from the original image. So this would be noise reduction. Noise reduction makes the most sense probably with older photos that have a lot of crack and grain in them. Now, the nice thing about noise is that, oh yeah, thanks all. Thank you, Lynn. Thank you, Hans-Peter. Awesome. Like I said, it'll be on YouTube. Thank you, Freddie. Thanks, Robert. Thank you, Ed. But I can also, within this noise function, I can also increase preserve detail. And what preserve detail is going to do is it's going to try to maintain as much granular detail as it can while still applying this luminosity function. So you can be very particular about this, and you can sort of hold certain information and blend other information using these sliders. Yeah, so noise reduction for sure you can utilize. Again, the end product is an image that has far less contrast, right? Because ultimately you're getting rid of all these elements that look like meaningful contrast to the eye. But where this might be useful, like I said, is with damaged or older images. It's up to you too, figure out how it's useful. Okay. How many images can you compare? I don't know. Let's find out. I'll just go back into a folder with a bunch of images. I'll click, let's click 8 images. Let's see if we can do 8 images. Oops. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Compare. Oh, it just brings them into a tableau. Okay, so it compares 4 images, but you essentially choose which ones you want to see. So you can basically drag and drop the ones that you want to compare into that section. So, and then there's controls. You can change 3 images, 2 images, 1 image, and then, like I said, 4, but then you choose from your tableau that's at the bottom. So Ted, 4 images at once, but there's a variety of different means and methods to change those. Simply drag and drop to choose more images. Ed, thank you, Adam. Very helpful. Have to leave. Thank you so much. Yes, the lesson will be on YouTube. I'll try to get up in the next couple days. Thank you, Franz. Thank you, Vince. Thank you, Galib. Thank you, Robert. I'm glad this was informative to you. Bill asked how the dehaze function works. Absolutely, I'll show you momentarily. Dave, thank you. Awesome. Glad. James, thank you. Thank you, Martin. Thank you, Kim. Dave Chandler, an intensive presentation, potentially very useful. Yes, please review it. Any chance of using a large cursor? I did actually increase my cursor size. I cannot increase it anymore. Under Windows settings, it's as high as it gets. I think that the only issue is that I'm using a 4K monitor, so it might appear slightly smaller. So what I might need to do in the future is change the display settings so that it appears slightly smaller. And I can do that. Thank you for reminding me to do that, Dave. I'll make a note of it for the next workshop. To change resolution. John, thank you. Jeremy and Guck, thank you so much. Okay, so we were going to show, what was I showing? Oh, dehaze, yeah. Robert, you're welcome. Thank you. Can record actions be edited? For example, set the light EQ step to something else or have to record again. Unfortunately, can't be edited, Ron. That is something where they do have to be edited or they have to be essentially re-recorded, which is unfortunate. I'd like to see that in a future edition of the workshop or of the editing software. And I think the ability to edit adjustment layers makes sense. Maybe less for filters because it's sort of a once and done sort of thing, but I'll suggest it to the developers in my meeting today. Yeah, dodge and burn layers are awesome. Again, that was part of the research that I did, and I was really stoked on it. So Janet, thank you. Please do. Richard, thank you. Okay, so dehaze on that same image. Let's open up that image again. I'll go into this folder. Dehaze is pretty straightforward, sort of like a curves adjustment that also kind of adds a granular detail. So I'll just give so dehaze, you get this like slider here. And as you can see, it completely gets rid of that sort of particulate in the air. depending on the amount that you increase. But what you do see is that there's a considerable vibrancy change in the water here, depending on how high you go with dehaze. I think dehaze within a realm of about 20 units can be quite useful on certain images. Past that, you're going to have to be readjusting those vibrancies. But yeah, it's sort of like a quick fix for areas that have fog or particulate detail in water, that sort of thing, mist, haze. Franz, you asked, I'm not sure if you're still here, but Franz, do you know what spiderweb you're talking? I'm not really sure what spiderweb you mean. Antoine, thanks for a useful presentation. Look forward to YouTube segment. Yes, awesome. Glad of it. Again, next couple days, it'll be up. And just one more time to link to everyone. If you have any questions in the future, please email me. My email is aprice@acdsystems.com. And our YouTube channel is /ACDC Photo Studio. Yeah. Franz, the whitish area in the top left, curious what you do. Oh, right here, you mean? Yeah, how did it come out in the final image? Yeah, I guess it is kind of nasty, isn't it? Yeah. Yeah, what would I do? Well, you know what I'd do, Franz? See how well this works. Okay, I'm gonna take my layer 1, okay, right here. Or no, I'm sorry, I'm gonna take my base layer. I want my base layer, okay? Take my base layer, and I'm going to use my lasso tool. I'm just going to take this guy right here, copy it, paste it. Pasting it will add a layer 2. I'm going to place it over top of that, okay? And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take, I'll commit that layer, and I'm going to add a mask to my layer 2, which is the copied portion. And I'm just going to take a black and a really low feathering and nib width, and I'm just going to sort of blend it in. Because there's so much particulate detail in that area that I think I can get away with just copy and pasting another part of my image. And as you can see, the before and after looks not bad. And I think if I was really zoomed out and I was playing around more again with the nib width, I could really get that to disappear. Again, you're looking for areas of your image that you can sort of hack. Essentially, you can hack the usage of them. So if I was back on my layer 1 to make a new selection, maybe I could steal just this area right here. And then once again, oops, don't mean to rotate it. Although maybe I should. Oh yeah, maybe rotate slightly. Place it, add a mask, add a brush, and just go through and make the edge of it less apparent so that it feels like, because there's so much particulate in that area, that I think I can just get away with doing that. Yeah. I don't know how much better ways there are. I mean, there's probably a spot. You can also probably play around with the Smart Erase brush in that area. But I honestly think that might just be the easiest way. Smart Erase would be way, 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 way more useful if there was less particle-like, very, very intense detail in that area. That's probably what you'd want to do. But given that the area is so full of detail, I think we can get away with literally using a lasso tool and copy and pasting over top, just because it really doesn't appear as if we've, I'm sorry, but there's no way you'd notice that. It's just not visible at all. You zoom out slightly, you don't even, you never knew it was there. So, but yeah, hopefully that answers your question. And with that, my friends, that is it. I am out. Like I said, I'll have this up on the next couple days. I really appreciate everyone sticking around for this just an hour and 20-minute long workshop. Yeah, if you have any questions, please email me as always. If you have any suggestions for the product, I appreciate that as well. If you're having any issues, I'll do my best to help you there. Yeah, and I hope you have a great rest of your Tuesday or Wednesday or whatever day it is for you in your part of the world. and I'll talk to you next time, which will be in November for when we have our next workshop. Thanks again. Yeah, and I'm going to mute my mic now. Signing off. I'll close this off in a second. So if you need to grab my email or our YouTube page, just make sure to just copy that information now before I close the workshop. Take care, everybody.